Coming up on 21st Century, in Paraguay, the long road to freedom for two people with disabilities. The parallel lives of Julio and Jorge, filmed over decades. Hello and welcome to 21st Century. I am Adeshewa Josh. On this episode, we want to take a moment to talk about people with intellectual disabilities. Around the world, such people are often feared and shut away. From Paraguay, we bring you the story of Julio and Jorge, once behind bars, but now free. But how many others are still living inside the labyrinth?
In 2008, we travelled to Paraguay and shot these images with Julio Rotello. Despite having committed no crime, he had spent the last 15 years of his young life behind bars, often in solitary confinement. They were some of the most disturbing scenes I had ever witnessed. We also met Jorge Bernal, close in age to Julio and sharing a similar, little understood disability. For several years, they were incarcerated side by side in the state psychiatric institution. Both young men have a severe form of autism, an intellectual disability, and they both suffered at the hands of a society that failed to understand and to protect them, which locked them behind bars, treating them with fear rather than compassion. But their stories began some 3 decades earlier. Abandoned as a baby, Julio's grandmother was left to raise the severely mentally disabled 2-year-old.
Se justo se me nunca con sí, hace 4 meses está ahí para a sufrir acá porque agua que van a niña va yo agua ya ataque me va baño ni una baña cante ya han rollo está ahí coger.
Alone and struggling to cope, she resorted to tying Julio to a tree to keep him from escaping. At 7 years old, Julio was taken away from her. With no other facilities available in this, one of the poorest countries in Latin America, he was put into the state's only psychiatric hospital in the capital, Asunción. At first, funds were set aside for his individual care by a dedicated nurse, as seen in this footage shot at that time.
Él era un chico muy inquieto, era un chico hiperkinético, hiperactivo. Lloraba, gritaba, rompía todo lo que encontraba, se pegaba por la pared. Cuando él se arrinconaba y lloraba y gritaba, vení Juli, vení acá mi bebé, yo siempre le decía, vení Julito en mi brazo, vení acá. Y venía y se apoyaba en mi falda, ponía su cabeza ahí y se calmaba. Yo le tocaba la cabecita y le mimaba y se calmaba, estábamos ahí horas y horas.
For a year, she looked after just him.
Me miraba en la cara y mamá, le decía yo, ma.
When the funding ran out, everything changed. He was taken from Lucilla and put into the men's section, where, for his own safety, he was locked up alone. Jorge Bernal's story began in another poor household in Asunción. As an autistic child, he was always running away from home, receiving no help for his care. When his young mother gave birth to her 6th child, she struggled to manage him.
Yo tenía mi bebé, Natalia era bebé. Y Muchas veces le tenía que dejar tirada a la bebé para ir a buscarle a él. Ponerle a veces las 5 de la mañana, las 12 de la noche.
In desperation, she turned to the authorities. The only solution, they told her, was to put Jorge in the institution.
Me dice que ese tipo de ayuda no hay. Pero si usted quiere puede ir a verle cómo estamos viviendo. No hay, me dice. ¿Por qué? Porque tu hijo no va a ser nunca útil a la sociedad.
In 1996, 12-year-old Jorge was also admitted to the neuropsychiatric hospital and put in the cell next to Julio. For 23 hours a day, they were locked away alone in filthy, cramped cells, neighbors in their isolation.
Y yo les decía, ¿y por qué? ¿Por qué le encierran? Cuando más le encierran, va a ser peor.
This is where human rights lawyer Alison Hillman found them in 2003. She shot this footage of them.
They slept and ate and resided in the very same space that they defecated and urinated. They were taken out of their cells to be hosed off. And when you have a locked institution, whether it's an orphanage or a psychiatric hospital or a prison ward, you find abuse, neglect, children tied to beds. When people are locked away from society, they're really invisible.
In response to Alison's unveiling of the violations being committed and the subsequent ruling by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, the conditions in the state-run psychiatric hospital improved slightly. And in 2008, Paraguay ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities,
The Republic of Paraguay.
which recognizes the right of everyone to live in dignity. A few weeks later, I went to Paraguay with Alison to see what had changed in Jorge and Julio's lives. Julio had been moved to a separate space in the institution for autistic boys.
This cell is a bit larger, it's a bit cleaner, and he does have access to a bathroom, but I don't believe that he has learned how to use it.
Julio, vení, vení.
That's what the international conventions stipulate, that people with disabilities have the right to be in the community and to receive the services and supports that they need to live in the community. I think that at this point there is will on the part of the government to change Julio's conditions and to get him perhaps into a substitute family-like setting. But I think mostly it's been a lack of resources and a lack of knowing what to do.
In 2008, Jorge's life had, in contrast, taken a different path. His 9-year stay in the institution had ended a year earlier. Because Blasida had found a cleaner's job and her other children were now older, she was finally able to take him back home.
Y me sentí muy bien porque era como que algo otra vez que yo siempre viví con una culpa de tener un hijo allá y volvió y para mí era lo máximo.
Jorge found himself at the center of a doting family and blossomed, relearning the social skills he lost during his years in isolation, as this footage shows.
Bebote, bebote.
In 2016, we went back to Paraguay for an update on Julio and Jorge's parallel lives. Jorge, now 30, was still living with his family.
Él es prioridad. Yo siempre agradezco la suerte que tengo de que tengo muchos hijos, porque ellos me ayudan en todo para cuidar a Jorge.
There is still no state financial or social help at all for families with a disabled member. So Blasida's children share the responsibility for Jorge's care with their mother. Natalia, now 19, explains when she is able to go to school.
Viernes de noche, sábado al mediodía y domingo a la mañana. Los otros días no voy a poder porque le voy a tener que cuidar a Jorge, sí o sí.
Hace ese sacrificio, por así decirlo, ¿verdad? Para quedarse con él. Y ella es la que más le entiende, o sea, totalmente.
While Natalia is with Jorge, Blasida earns the money for the family. As in 2008, she still works as a cleaner in the same institution where her son and Julio were once locked up.
Me contrataron como una ayuda para cuidarle a mi hijo, para que no le falte comida y todas esas cosas.
And she's more grateful now than ever to have a job.
Hace un año desarrolló una enfermedad que es la diabetes, por consecuencia de uno de los medicamentos que estaba consumiendo para su cuadro. Al comienzo para nosotros fue muy difícil.